But there is an argument that the apostasy happened immediately.
Wow, that's wild. The fact that we call Christianity and Judaism separate religions is in itself an evidence of the apostasy. It was always supposed to be one unified religion from the beginning to the end.
A lot of Jews would disagree with that. We've married imperial power with religion. Once you've married imperial power to religion, now all manner of corruption can take place.
Why is the New Testament written anyway? From the beginning, there is massive disagreement.
Bingo.
That's why the books are written.
When somebody on the internet says you're not Christian, you're worshiping a different Jesus, that is light stuff compared to what these guys do.
Yeah. Over half the New Testament is written by a guy that, by all accounts, didn't walk with Jesus.
This is what all religion does. It fragments over time. For example, one thing that Christianity is fragmenting on is, do we ordain ministers that are involved in same-sex relations? And that's literally dividing churches today. Mm-hmm. And the question is, was that the plan? Was that what Jesus wanted?
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode on the Sticky Joseph YouTube channel. I'm in my bed right now. Jackson and I are going out into the field tomorrow for some field exercises, and I got to record this intro before we head out. So this episode is so freaking epic. It's one of those ones where I learned something that I had no idea about, but is right in front of us in the scriptures. We talk a little bit about James, the brother of Jesus, and the feud that seems to have been going on between him and the Apostle Paul. We talk about the apostasy in general, what the condition set was for the apostasy. And really at the end of the episode, I was like, when we get back from deployment, we need to record like a 5 or 6 hour long conversation about the apostasy, because Mike is very knowledgeable on it, but we weren't able to get into everything in just a short conversation. This is going to be one of those ones you're going to want to share around with all of your friends. It's epic. So last thing before we get into it, if you want to support the channel, you can get one of these crews, or we have a sweatshirt version that's blue of Be Still, and then has a scripture right here. And then we also have Go and Do crews and hoodies that obviously have the scripture reference in 1 Nephi 3:7. So if you want to support the channel and also wear something that's really comfortable and cool and shares the gospel, then you can get it. Link in the description. Love you guys and enjoy this episode.
Yeah.
He's making fun of James. James was a Nazarite.
Yeah.
In fact, we're Nazarites. He is mocking
He was very pious.
the Jewish Christian leadership of the church. Not of the Jewish Christians, but of the only church there was.
Are you guys going to save any of this for the episode, or are you just going to keep talking?
I don't even think we're going to talk about this. This is like we'll talk about
All right, while they ramble on, welcome back. Or welcome for the first time, you first-timers here at the Sick of Joseph. If it is your first time, we have a couple regulars in the studio with us, and they've become regulars because, honestly, they've earned the spot. Not that they need any approval from us, but this is Mike Day.
Dr. Mike Day.
Dr. Mike Day. This is the first time we're filming, and it's Dr. Mike Day.
Yes.
You guys are embarrassing me.
You did it, man.
Nothing's changed.
But it also doesn't
You're a
mean
doctor.
anything until you get your plain and precious publishing diploma, which may come one day if you can write a book.
Yeah, I'm almost done, guys. I'm hopeful to be out there in the spring, summer 2025. Can I plug it really quick?
Yeah, plug it, dude.
So this book is basically, I'm trying to reach 18 to 30-year-olds because I've had so many people over the years come to me and say, holy cow, what was the temple? Mm-hmm. I don't even know what this is. So it's a little bit of temple prep, but if you've already been in the temple, there's a lot of stuff where we go really, really deep. Even if you've read all the collected works of Hugh Nibley, those people can still walk out of here and go, wow, I love the footnotes. There's a lot of adventurous stuff there, but it's written mainly to that 18 to 30
like
bracket.
Normal people.
Yeah,
not
normal
weird
folks.
Weirdos like you.
But you help me. You bring me into normalcy by just talking to you, and you'll say, Mike, say that differently for a normal person, right?
Yeah,
and so that's why working with you has been so beneficial for me as a writer, because I feel like we're going to make sure that it's smart, but that it's normal.
Yeah, you guys are awesome.
Thank you.
And then obviously Dave Butler.
Yes.
I need your approval.
And you almost have it.
Okay.
One day we will be proud. We will say
Also,
we're proud
I
of you.
Princess Leia and Boba Fett stickers on my computer like Mike Day has.
Yeah.
Hey, and then what is this one? Is that Chewy?
I can't even see
Yeah,
it.
it's
It is Chewy.
I have a Chewy.
That's epic.
sticker. 'cause
But
I'm a
Hayden
total
and
nerd.
we are filming this. We're on our holiday leave right now, so we got to come home and converse and live around normal people for a couple weeks, and it's been awesome.
But by the way, what has it been like when you've been out in the desert blowing stuff up? Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
It's been exactly what you just said.
Being in the desert.
And you get
blowing
up,
stuff
you
up.
sleep in every day till what, 9:30 every day?
Yeah, it's pretty much just super chill.
Sleep in, and
No.
watch Netflix.
We live outside about half of the time. It is winter, but we are in 29 Palms. So what that means is during the day, it's sunny and nice. At night, it's very cold and windy.
And we can say that because this is not going to be released until after we are no longer in 29 Palms.
yes, so operational security. All right, sir.
Yeah. But no, we just work out a lot, hang out with our buddies, and
Do you shoot stuff?
shoot a lot of stuff.
What's your favorite weapon that you like to take out into the field? And I just want to hear about weapons for a minute.
Yeah. So our service rifle is an M27 service rifle. It has a 16-inch barrel and a suppressor on it, and it shoots 5.56. It's just a classic, just nice, good rifle. You can shoot about 500 to 600 meters pretty accurately,
Okay.
and that is what we all carry. But Jackson gets to carry something special.
Yeah. What's cool about that thing is it's fully automatic as well. It's really cool. But yeah, I get to carry this thing called an M320. It's like, have you played Call of Duty before?
Of course. By the way, you know what would be really cool in this video is if there was a picture of you geared up with the weapon of choice.
we'll put it
that
in
would
there.
be
Pictures
epic.
too.
For
We
me
got
as
it.
a viewer, I would have watched that again and again and go, that is so cool. But go back to COD
Yeah,
anyway.
we'll
What were you
send
saying?
some pictures to Brandon Russin.
Okay.
Anyways, so Call of Duty, right? Like the grenade launcher that you can attach to your weapon.
Okay.
It's no longer attached to your weapon. It's called an M320 now. So it's this thing I carry on my hip, and you just put like it's a 40 millimeter grenade round in it, and you can shoot up to like 350 meters, and it sounds exactly like it does on Call of Duty. Thunk. Yeah.
Just like that.
Yeah, and then you watch the round. You can watch the round, and if you're not using like high explosive round, but like just a training round, it has like, they call them Cheeto Puffs because it has a plastic cap on it that's just full of like orange dust, and so you can watch it in the air and then just explode orange dust on your target.
Now, I heard
fun.
you say this twice, and I have to understand I'm speaking American. So you keep referring to these things called meters. So translate that for me. What's 350
Kind
meters?
of almost like yards.
So what's 350 meters
About
roughly?
1,000 feet.
It's like 400 yards maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to use meters
more.
because our
many yards?
reticles inside of our scopes have what's called mil dots, which allow us to find out how far away things are based on like the shoulder width of a man.
Okay.
And so we have so you can put it on the shoulder of a man depending on how thick if it fills up the space, then you aim your rifle up higher to that distance.
Okay.
So we have to use meters for that because mils, it's mathematics stuff that we don't really understand. Dave, you were gonna say something?
I was going to say 40 millimeters. So that's the diameter of this grenade round, about 1.6 inches. So it's like a
it's
grenade
pretty
about
good.
the size of the tiny Coke cans kind of thing.
Yeah, about that size, yeah.
Honestly.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
But it's been super fun. And now that we have gotten rid of all the viewers except for teenage boys and men like ourselves.
By the way, never use a sniper rifle in Carrington. Never.
What is
That's from The Office. Sorry.
okay.
That's a shout out to my sons who watch The Office. So like, don't use a sniper rifle in Carrington. It's a Jim comment.
Yeah.
Mike, I've got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sometimes when I talk to Catholic or evangelical friends of mine, they call me crazy for even thinking that a great apostasy after the death of Jesus and the apostles actually happened,
Yeah.
and that there was an actual need for the restoration. What say ye?
Wow. That's a big question.
It's all you, big boy.
Okay, so, I guess we'll start off with that reference in 2 Thessalonians where it says, so there's these two bits, right? One bit where Paul's talking and he says, hey, and there's this anticipation Jesus is coming. And then the bit that is in the one in the missionary discussions, right? That says there's that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. What's that reference? It's like 2 Thessalonians 2 or something, right? Let's go there really quick. Just so we get
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Well, the man of
Who's the man of sin? Is it the next political leader? Who is the man of sin?
It's Barack Obama.
Colton Miller, and I don't know if we've
It's
released
Abraham
this one yet.
Lincoln is the man of sin.
Colton Miller had something to say about that, but
2 Thessalonians chapter, I think it's chapter 2. Yeah. Okay. Verse 3.
Yep.
So he says in verse 2, don't be shaken or mind and troubled or by spirit nor by word nor by letter as from us, as the day of Christ is at hand. You see, there was a really big expectation in early Christianity that, and even Paul seems to hint at this, that Jesus is coming. And there's some people that say things like, even Paul says, or they would say that Paul says, don't even worry about getting married. Jesus is coming. And then it's kind of pulled back here in this chapter where he says, don't worry, that day will not come except there come a falling away first. And that word falling away is in Greek is that word for apostasy. Apostasia. Stasia, your histeme is to stand in Greek, and apo is away. So we're going away from our stance. And apostasy literally can mean like a mutiny. Like I go to Dave's house and he's running the ship, and I'm like, we got to kill Dave. And if we kill him, we're going to be able to eat all the Cheetos and have all the grenade launchers. And we're like, arr.
You do not know my house.
So this is Paul saying, Jesus isn't coming back again until, and he literally uses until there is an apostasy first.
That's what he says. Yeah. So that's like the money text. Now, as a missionary, I never use that.
Yeah.
Because it's like you're teaching somebody and right over, like, what are you talking about? So I would use the text in Amos, right? They're wanting the food, the famine in the land. Yeah. So I would use that verse. And a lot of times I would just kind of teach it. Hey, and the way I would teach it on my mission is, have you ever wondered why there's so many different Christian churches? And that was really Joseph Smith's question. I don't think Joseph Smith sat and studied Greek or read this passage in Paul, but Joseph Smith basically said, I saw the order in the heavens, but then all these churches were fighting over the correct way of doctrine, which way to think, what makes me saved. His mother was, and his sisters were leaning Presbyterian, and in that faith tradition, Calvinism was reigning supreme, which is the sovereignty of God is over everything. You don't even need to really necessarily pray because God's already decided you're saved, you're damned. That's how it is. I just damned you. I'm sorry. And I killed you in the first minute of the video. Yeah. So
it's been a rough episode.
So sorry, you get no approval. But the idea was, and in Calvinism was really big in Presbyterianism, and Joseph struggled with that, right? And so whether you believe in the apostasy or not, I think we can all agree that there is division in Christianity when it comes to doctrine. And right now, even today, we're having a huge division in churches. And this is what all religion does. It fragments over time with, for example, one thing that Christianity is fragmenting on is what do we do? Do we ordain ministers that are involved in same-sex relations? And that's literally dividing churches today. And the question is that really... was that the plan? Is that what Jesus wanted? So I think easy softball pitch, swing, and a hit is...
we're obviously not unified under Christ.
There's an issue, right? And so I think I would go with that. But just like you said, Paul even used the word.
Yeah. Apostasy.
Now, you could take that, the man of sin being revealed, and here's one way. This is how one of my old teachers, when I was a brand new seminary teacher, his name was Cal Stevens, he said this. He said, the man of sin who's revealed was the adversary. Because when Joseph walked out of the sacred grove, he knew God, but what else did he know?
He knew Satan.
It was revealed that there really was a Satan, and he was revealed. So when Joseph walked out of the sacred grove, verse 2, man, it was revealed, and we start the restoration. So that's one way to read 2 Thessalonians. But then you could go, we could write a book on this. What are the evidences of the apostasy? What are some things that happen sequentially in Christian church history that you could literally hang on a timeline and say, oh, then this happened. And by the way, this event led to this event. Because that's what historians do. They can see how events kind of create new events and new things.
Was after the death of the apostles and like all the creeds and whatnot, was there like pretty much a centralized Christian denomination? Like, how did we go from like one when Jesus Christ was here to 45,000?
And I think, Dave, you might even say there probably wasn't even one in the first century, was there?
No, 100%. So this is okay. I always feel like I have nothing to say in these things.
You always do, bro.
You have something to say.
I'm hesitant to go too deep into this.
Say it.
So a guy named Robert Eisenman in the late 20th century, I think Eisenman's still alive, probably pretty elderly now, threw some really big bombs, okay? relating to the Dead Sea Scrolls and his interpretation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And he was an important guy. He was an important player. The scrolls were all being sort of kept private. Like what happened was when they were discovered, academics or institutions would hold them and not publish them so that their PhD students could feast on them as long as possible. And Eisenman was one of the guys who was sort of instrumental in breaking the logjam and forcing everybody's hand and making the documents public after 40 years. People have been sitting on them for decades.
Wow.
His thesis about the Dead Sea Scrolls is radical, okay? And I'm going to tell you his thesis, but the big point is that whether or not he's right, and I suspect that he's probably mostly wrong, but he's really forced a reevaluation of James, the brother of Jesus, in the last sort of 25 years. Okay,
See, because I didn't even think that James was the brother.
so this is the thing:
Jesus.
is that
This
if
is-
you, if
James,
you
the
ask sort of
brother
your
of
average
Jesus?
churchgoer about the brothers of Jesus, they can maybe remember there are
So
some.
Peter, James, and John, like that James,
Yeah.
people think is the brother of Jesus.
So it's interesting. So literally read, the Gospels say that's a different James, but that different James is a James who is executed in Acts 15, and then immediately afterwards in Acts 16, James, the brother of Jesus, about whom we have a lot of information outside of the New Testament. He is a very well corroborated historical figure, shows up. And James, the brother of Jesus, was clearly in charge of whatever Christianity was
In Jerusalem.
up until his death in 62 AD.
So what about Peter? Where was Peter? Was Peter executed? Okay.
Again, if you actually read Paul's letters, it seems pretty clear that James is the one who is the decider, and not Peter or Cephas.
yeah.
Okay.
And Acts
Now-
15 kind of hints to this. There's some tension in there, isn't there, Dave?
Well, okay, hold on. Let's talk Eisenman for a minute, okay? So here's Eisenman's hypothesis. Okay, this is radical, but understand the radicality of this forced everyone to look at James and think about it.
What's the name of the book on Eisenman?
The first one is James, the brother of Jesus. The subtitle is something like "Unlocking the Secret of the Dead Sea Scroll" or something like that.
Okay.
James, the brother of Jesus, Robert Eisenman.
Robert Eisenman.
This
okay.
is I'm not really recommending this book. It is a really dense read. It was well written, poorly edited. It's basically unedited.
It's pretty boring,
I think
yeah.
Random House was like, we cannot edit this, and they just
We don't
surrendered.
have anyone smart enough or knowledgeable enough
They
to edit
didn't even.
it, so.
You're like, man, just on a sentence level, it needed more work. Anyway, but it's okay. Here's the argument: the Christian church, as it appears in the Book of Acts, is a complete fiction. Never was like that. The Dead Sea Scrolls are the real thing. They are bona fide. What the picture of Christianity that we have in Acts and in Paul's writings is a fictionalized version of the Dead Sea Scrolls community, who what they really were was very extreme Nazarite Jews. Okay, they were nationalists, they were xenophobic, they were really angry that foreigners were sacrificing in the temple. Okay. So the sort of order of sources. The Dead Sea Scrolls are honest, but we have to understand what they are. The New Testament is telling a lie, but if we sort of read it backwards, we can see what it's really talking about. The Talmud is also telling a lie. It's the other side of the same lie, because the rabbis also hated the Nazarite Jews. Everybody hated them.
Yeah.
Okay. Josephus, sometimes lying, but surprisingly true enough that he helps us make sense of the whole thing. Okay? And so his take is, look, after Jesus, and he never really talks about Jesus. His argument is, if we can figure out who James is,
Then we can
like whatever James was, Jesus was, is literally his line.
Yeah,
okay. And he says, and I think this is pretty clearly true from the New Testament. Jesus dies, James takes over. James runs the church for the next 30 years. James, in ancient sources, in ancient Jewish sources, is described as being so well beloved. First of all, he's described as being a priest. He's described as having scabs on his knees so they looked like the knees of a camel because he went in the Holy of Holies
so
and
much.
prayed for his people.
Yeah.
And that can only imply that he was a high priest, because otherwise
James,
you don't
the
go into
brother
the
of
Holy.
Jesus,
Yes.
could have been the high priest.
Super
Yes,
pious.
this is the author of the Epistle of James.
Super following,
Yes.
super following Judaism. In fact, he was so avid and so obedient that even the Jews couldn't say anything. They were just like, you are so awesome. And that really pulled people towards Christianity.
Yeah.
And a lot of authors have said this. If you went to synagogue in 60 AD, I might be a Jamesian Christian, you might be a pious Jew. We would disagree on who the Messiah was, but we're both Jewish.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he
Right?
Yes. So
Yeah.
he seemed to be his Judaism included frequent bathing, not wearing animal fibers, vegetarianism.
Yeah.
Okay. And Nazaritism. So
You don't cut your
vows, not cutting your hair,
That's pretty sick.
making vows with God. So that's all pretty public record. Eisenman's argument was there was no Christianity that we're talking about. Paul invented that as a cloak for James's Nazaritism and for what James had, which is a kind of Judaism. Okay, and so the thing that went out in the world and triumphed is this illusion created by Paul.
Now, you don't have to agree with that, but
Yeah.
one of the things the New Testament does show is there is tension, and the New Testament does show that bit.
So-
and it's in Galatians. We can look at it
Yeah.
for your audience, because I know some of your viewers are right here going, "Oh my gosh, Dave
Some
is a
people are
heretic."
like, some people are sure, I'm sure, are like, what do you mean James, the brother of Jesus? Because you ask the average person, the average pew person, pew goer, right?
Pew, not that pew.
Also that pew, and they probably don't know anything about James, right?
So, okay, real quick, just let me try to wrap my head around what's being
Yes.
said real quick.
Yep, it is a
So,
big radical thesis.
Yeah, it's a big
we
thing.
killed Dave. Sorry.
Okay, so here we go. So the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Yep.
Josephus, the New Testament, other early Christian writings are all telling different stories.
Yes.
And
so is the New Testament.
There is some agreements, but there is more difference than agreements. So it kind of seems like we got to pick one or maybe two and try to synthesize them together. And what you're saying is that there are people that believe, and one of the prevailing theories is that Paul, who went radically from hardcore Jew to something else to what he described as Christianity.
Well, the claim is he wasn't a Jew, actually. Eisenman would say
really?
he wasn't a Jew. For one thing, Paul in the Epistle of Romans says, greet Herodian, my kinsman. Herodian means little Herod. So there's the suggestion that Paul is related to the Herod family. So Paul
which are not Jewish.
they were Arabs. They're Idumeans.
Yeah.
So his argument is Paul is not Jewish. But yes, sorry, you're on the right track. Keep going.
Yeah. So, so I guess the point is that I'm seeing so far is that the Bible is not so cut and dry, which is something we have come to that conclusion a trillion times on the Stick of Joseph. And
Yes.
so now the question that we have is, of all of these accounts, how do we make sense of what actually happened? And does the Book of Mormon help with that?
You know what I'm always
Does the
going to say?
Restoration
I'm always
help
going to
with
use the
that?
Book of Mormon to read the Bible.
Yes.
I'm always going to do that.
And so what is the Christianity that is practiced among the Nephites is probably a lot closer. It's not the same Christianity that Paul was practicing in a lot of ways.
That's an interesting question. So let me keep going here with Eisenman and stuff. So Eisenman is a radical. He wins adherents, but like basically people don't accept his arguments. He makes them over a series of big books. It's interesting stuff. But what he does force people to do is look at James, the brother of Jesus. And like we get in the last 20 years, a bunch of book-length studies of James, a figure who had been basically completely ignored for the previous 100 years. The last person to look seriously at James was a German theologian named F.C. Bauer. And Bauer had said, hey, I mean, this is back in like 1920s, I think. Bauer had said, hey, you know what? If we look at the New Testament, we have two completely different perspectives on Christianity. There's a Jamesian church and a Paul church, and they argue, and the Paul church seems to win. And everyone said, shut up, you liberal. And he lost the discussion, and his so-called Tübingen school was out of favor for a long time. But sort of the ideas of the Tübingen school are back, and people are saying, actually, yeah, Paul and James so here's what I think is safe to say, okay? Paul and James disagree. By the way, it's a super interesting experience to read the New Testament not starting with the Gospels. Okay? They're almost certainly not the oldest books in the New Testament.
Start chronologically in the way they were written, and it does read different.
It reads very different. If you go Thessalonians first, Galatians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Romans, Hebrews, then you read your first gospel, and then you come into it not with these stories of Jesus, but with Paul talking repeatedly about his arguments with these annoying
priests from Jerusalem.
Yeah, Christians from Jerusalem who were telling everyone they still have to get circumcised and keep the law of Moses, and how that one guy, Cephas, said he agreed with Paul, but then he turned his back on him and betrayed him when James sent guys down to spy on us. And it becomes clear that there's an argument, and Paul's on one side, and the guy who is in charge is James. James is he's the bishop. He's the one. He's the head of the church.
Yeah,
and he's the one. And you get different versions in Galatians and also in Acts about how these. And what are the questions? Do we have to still keep the law of Moses?
Who can be part of our team?
Yeah, by the way, who is we? If I'm a Jew and I have to keep the law of Moses as a Christian, what about someone who wants to become a Christian who isn't a Jew? Does he have to keep the law of Moses? What about, am I allowed to, share food with Gentiles?
Communion.
Right? These are the issues. Those don't seem to be the only issues that James and Paul disagree on. So there's another point. I think it's Romans versus the Epistle of James. So the Jamesian view, by the way, is almost written out of the New Testament. It is in the Epistle of James. It seems to be also in Revelation and in Jude, and actually the Sermon on the Mount.
I was going to say the Jamesian view is reflected in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus giving this sounds like a Pharisee. He sounds like you've got to do stuff and you have to be pious and obedient, and there's an expectation, and it's not a free-for-all. And I'm not saying Paul is necessarily, I'm trying to simplify Paul, but the Sermon on the Mount is very Jamesian, isn't it?
But because the rough characterization is the Jamesian point of view still seems to be, hey, we're still Jews.
Yeah.
We're still Jews. There is still this law of Moses.
Yes. And I also, and I've had this conversation many times with, a pastor friend of ours, Pastor Jeff, who we've had on the channel. And I've pointed out, it's like
notorious Jamesian.
It seems like no, he's a notorious.
He's
Pauline.
a Pauline.
Yeah.
Jeff.
So I mean, but that's the majority of Protestant Christianity.
Sure. Paul won the conversation.
And there seems to be this absolute focus on Romans.
Yeah.
Like it's like Romans, and for us, I'm going to read the Gospels, and I'm going to take those. Like, you can't hold everything on the same level of importance. I don't believe that. Like, you have to have some sort of hierarchy. And even though, like, you can say this is all inspired scripture to some degree, if Jesus is saying one thing and Paul is saying something else, and it seems like they do kind of butt heads a lot of it, then I'm going to choose Jesus over Paul.
Well, that's super interesting.
When Paul is saying, only by grace you are saved. And then when Jesus has said, repent and be baptized, or you cannot enter the kingdom of God, it seems like there is more than just like...
Okay, and I'm going to throw this at you.
Yeah.
What if they're both true, but we're missing a piece? So I'm going to throw this out there, and I know you're on a roll, so don't lose what you're going to say, but I'm just going to say this about James to defend him. So it wasn't until I took John Peterson's class at the U. I'm teaching at the U, at the Institute, but I'm also taking John Peterson's Christian history class because he's studied it a ton.
He's awesome.
And I'm sitting in his class, and he's showing me in real time the fight in the New Testament. And it took many, many hours of him going through it with the class. and everything. And I'm just sitting there back there going, oh, this is gold. But one of the things he said to me stuck with me, and I'll never forget it. He said, I'm not going to throw Paul under the bus or James. They're both trying to spread the message of Jesus. And think about this. If you're Jesus's brother in Jerusalem and you have a group of people that believe Jesus is the Messiah, it might be a matter of life and death what you say about the law.
Yeah.
So if you say anything against the law and you're in Jerusalem, it could get you killed. So what if, I'm just throwing this out there, what if his protection of the law and piousness was to keep Jesus and that mission and that message alive in Jerusalem, and Paul was doing his thing, and what if from God's perspective they're both doing good, but we're sitting here and 2,000 years after looking at this and going, oh, there's tension, but what if... Do you see what I'm saying? I'm trying to give grace to both sides. I'm just throwing that out there. I just wanted to make sure I said that before we moved on.
Yeah, for sure.
So to your point, Hayden, it's potentially particularly interesting when the gospel seems to contradict Paul, because the gospels are probably written after Paul, and the general view is that they are. One of the functions of them is to impose a Pauline point of view. So, for example, in a couple of places, I want to say it's in John and in Mark, there are passages that denigrate Jesus's family, that say that his family didn't believe, right? The point of which seems to be to say, James never understood him. Paul knew the truth all along, right?
Yeah.
So it is interesting when the Gospels, like Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount, right? Because the argument between Paul in Romans and James in James, specifically about specific verses in the Old Testament and about Abraham, and was it for his faith alone? This is Paul's argument, or was it for his righteous deeds? That's James's argument, that he was justified, that he was called righteous, right? I'm
going to throw this out there too. The Gospels also came later, and it's not just one scholar making this argument. There are many scholars that make the argument that the Gospels were written to make a point about who Jesus was. So some of the earliest stuff show the human side of Jesus, and there were a group of individuals that believed that Jesus kind of became the Son of God, that he was, in other words, born naturally, but he became endowed with God's power, and he became the Messiah, and he became a son of God, not in the literal sense, but empowered with his Spirit at his baptism. Right.
And this is a point of view associated with Jewish Christians, so-called Ebionites, and James, is that they didn't think Jesus, apparently, we don't have much of their writings, but they didn't think Jesus was born divine.
Right. We have those arguments. And then we have the other side. So I'm just going to paint you a pendulum here, or a spectrum. On one side, Jesus was human.
Yeah.
On the other side, he was uber divine. So to counterbalance the Ebionite position, we have the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Logos.
Yeah.
Jesus was divine from the pre-earth life. He was a God, and he was the Lamb of God. And in John, it's almost like the Yoda version of Jesus. Jesus knows what's going to happen before it does. In John, right, he says, I am, ego me, and the bad guys that come to arrest him fall down. Like, this is very much like Yoda. And I'm not trying to denigrate Jesus. I'm just trying to paint a picture.
Or Yoda.
And Yoda's great. He's super divine. Well, some people took the position Jesus was so divine, he only seemed to suffer because he was God. God can't be slain. He didn't die. So these guys become called Docetus, from the word dokio in Greek, which means to seem. He only seemed to suffer. He was so divine. So on one hand, he was human. On one side, he was so divine. And these groups of Christians existed in the first century in real time. And the Gospels were trying to address those and teach, no, Jesus was divine, you Ebionites, John, but he also bled and sweat and was hungry. And so there were coming into orthodoxy with all these variant Christianities that are existing in the first 100 years. Which, by the way, you've been on social media. Have you seen Latter-day Saints with all kinds of different opinions?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to point out, and this makes it New Testament is so interesting to read, to think that Paul and James kind of had beef, because when you read James, right?
They didn't kind of
First
have
off,
beef. They
yeah,
really
they had a lot of beef.
Yeah, I think it's Galatians where Paul expresses the hope that James and his followers will castrate themselves.
Yeah,
We need to
wild.
read that.
I think doesn't King James soften it though?
What I was going to point
Yeah, it
out.
says, I hope they cut themselves off.
By that which offends them or something. Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's so softened in the King James, but in the Greek it's pretty brutal.
It's like you missed Jesus' latrine joke because the King James hides it.
Because the King James hides it, but really, okay.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting because James, right? This is where the famous faith without works is dead. So Paul's like saying it's by faith you are saved, but he seems to be talking more of like this ethereal belief, maybe like a confession of Christ.
Yeah.
And James is saying the way that you show faith, which I agree with.
Yeah.
I agree with James. The way that you show faith is through your actions, right? The other thing that's really interesting to point out is that the restoration, at least the way Joseph Smith describes it, starts off in the book of James.
It does.
Right? And when you read the book of James, and we didn't do that until earlier this year. I remember I got on the phone. I don't remember if it was Mike or Dave, but I just read the whole first chapter, and I was like, bro, this is the temple. Like the whole temple. It's just absolutely wild.
I've learned that once you hang out with Dave, you start to see it, because like I said, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
So, friends, going back to the question that sparked this thing off, when I said how did we go from 1 to 45,000, what I'm getting
There
from
never
what you're
was a
saying,
one.
they had a hard time getting on the same page from the beginning.
Yeah.
And let me just say one more thing about that, and then I'll get off James so we can talk about Constantine and all that stuff.
No, we don't have to talk about Constantine. We can do it another time.
It's all good. So consider
read the
this. So
castration
Eisenman, I think, is an atheist, and I think James Tabor is probably also an atheist who's written a couple, three very interesting books on this subject.
Yeah.
Okay. If you take out the divine perspective, okay, think about this like you're just a secular historian.
Yeah.
And you go, all right, we have a disagreement. There's, on the one hand, James, who grew up as the brother of Jesus. Now, especially, you don't believe in divine stuff, so you don't think he was immaculately conceived. He's like Jesus' brother or half-brother or something. Like, you grew up with this guy. You knew him all his 30 years of life. You took over his organization and ran it for 30 years, and everyone totally respected you. That guy's on one side of the debate. On the other side of the debate is a guy who was going around killing you, right? Killing your followers at the beginning, and then said, well, I had a vision. I saw Jesus myself. And in the debate between those two guys, somehow the crazy guy saying he had a vision gets all the followers.
And that's totally from the atheist perspective.
From an atheist historical point of view, that's what happened.
Which is kind of a crazy story.
Which is crazy because we had Jamesian Christians called Ebionites, or Ebionim, which means the poor.
And what did they turn into?
They ceased to exist. Now, maybe they have descendants among other kinds of Abrahamic type groups like the Mandeans or Sabaeans or other kinds of, but they basically ceased to exist, I think, by about 400 AD, right? In this debate, James appears to have lost. Okay? Now, it's because I don't believe in a historical materials point of view that I think, well, maybe we don't immediately write Paul out. Let's think about this.
Because he also was the one who said that there would be a falling away first in that verse that we read first, right?
Yes, and also there is in the Pauline epistles a whole lot of also, I think, underappreciated Sermon on the Mount language. And I think this is a conversation for another time. I think what we really have here is two mystics who have had the same visionary experience who are disagreeing about its meaning.
Or implementation of that meaning, even.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but there is an argument that the apostasy happened immediately.
Immediately. Wow, that's wild. That was a good segue because I've never heard that before. You know, the way that it's kind of painted, the simplistic overhead view is Jesus dies. Peter's like, all right, guys, we're going to continue this. And they continue it for like 40 years. And then eventually they all get killed.
They get murdered.
Or it grows too fast. The bush grows too fast, which may be an oversimplification, but there may be some truth in that as well. You know, like obviously you can see it just in today's world. those who have served mission in missions where like the gospel is really new, I've heard so many stories of things going off the walls. Like they open up a new city, a new branch, and it goes like wildfire. And then all of a sudden, all these crazy things are getting implemented.
Everyone's saying poems at the sacrament table and washing their hands with big bowls of water in front of the congregation, and gathering healing energy into pots of ricotta cheese to practice Reiki.
Yes,
for
that
example.
sort of stuff. For example, it sounds like that's something that you experienced.
My mission had fun too.
It's wild stuff. But so I think that is an oversimplification, but there is probably some truth in that as well. So let's say that for some reason it did stay together.
Okay.
Let's say there was it stayed
Unified
together.
Unified Christianity
at the beginning.
Which there wasn't. Yeah.
Take it away, Mike, and then you got like 25 minutes.
Yeah, let's go.
Less?
Okay, so let's say we don't even have to pretend that. It's already fragmented. How does it even get more fragmented as time goes on? Talk about Constantine. Talk about all of it.
We can't really talk about Constantine until we talk about a couple groups of people.
Okay.
This honestly should be like the Masonry episode. It could be a 5-hour thing.
Oh, I honestly,
when we get back, let's do.
So when I taught seminary, so one of the most powerful experiences I had as a brand new seminary teacher is I sat in this big room with all these teachers, and I was a brand new wet behind the ears seminary teacher. This is up at Weber State University in like 1993. And a teacher stands up and says, listen, you won't really appreciate the restoration till you know why you needed it. And to know why you needed it, you had to know of an apostasy. And he just talked for like 45 minutes and just went really fast. It was a fire hose, and it was before, PowerPoint. And so he had these overheads, and he kept putting a different overhead up, and it just went really fast. And my mind was blown, because I realized, oh my gosh, there's an apostasy. You can document it in real time. And then since 1993, so it's been 30 years, I've just been reading
over and over
stuff because I'm a nerd, right? But one of my favorite books, and anybody can read it, and it's just so awesome. It's by this guy named Shelley. I think his name is Bruce Shelley. It's called Church History in Plain Language.
I have that book.
It is so good.
Mark Peterson recommended it because I took that same class while you were taking a class. I remember sitting next to you in some of those classes.
Yeah, it was awesome, right?
Yeah.
And the cool thing about it is it's on audio, and it's totally in plain language. It's one of my favorite ways to read is when someone has really good ideas, but they can explain it in plain language. And obviously, Bruce Shelley's point isn't necessarily that there was an apostasy, but he shows you historically what happened to the early Christian church. And then, I've spent years I've read every book by Bart Ehrman on the subject, and Bart doesn't necessarily believe in Jesus, but one of the things he points out is that the Gospels are putting out fires. There's all this disunity, and in his view, almost all Scripture, or all of it, is a polemic. It's an attack. Oh, you said you don't like Cane's chicken, and I like Chick-fil-A. Well, I'm going to write about that.
Yeah.
And so that's what they did. So after the apostles died,
it's just diss tracks. That's all the scriptures
diss tracks over and over. I mean, but the first vision is a diss track. They're creeds. Waka, waka, waka. We're going to diss it, right?
Yeah.
And then we don't like those. And so, sorry. Put that in the video. So anyway.
The waka, waka, waka really made it.
Well, you know what that is? That's when, is it Fozzie?
It's Fozzie,
or
yeah.
Animal on what's the name of that show? The Muppets? The Muppet Show. When he's doing that, I'm like, that is the ultimate rapper.
Yeah.
Animal or Fozzie. Anyways, I don't know where that came from. But
Waka, waka, waka.
Waka,
is
waka,
definitely
waka.
the sound that Fozzie Bear makes.
I love Fozzie Bear.
Waka, waka, waka.
Yes. Okay. So back on. Okay. So you have the apostles. These guys know Jesus.
Yeah.
But then what about the dudes and the ladies who know the people that knew Jesus, like the next gen, right? And those people are called the Apostolic Fathers. And they're a group of people that walk around and say things like, hey, John baptized me. And so I know John, and I'm going to carry on the tradition. And one of the things historians will say is if you want to know about Dave, don't read about Dave from hundreds of years later, but the closest you can get to the source of somebody who knew him and wrote about him, the closer you can get, the closer you are.
But how many people knew Dave, and what did all those people write about him? Like that's the question, because there's a lot of people that know Dave, and there's people that hate you.
Some of them sued him.
Nobody cannot
Sued
like you, Dave.
Yeah,
And here's
Believe me, some people can.
yeah.
Here's an
And
interesting
At least
thought.
one person married him, like
Great chagrin.
yeah.
Here's an interesting thought as well, is like over half the New Testament is written by a guy that by all accounts didn't walk with Jesus.
Right.
While he's alive.
And I don't mean to throw a curveball and get everybody in the comment section hating me.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I believe this, but what I'm about to say is there's evidence for this. And so I'm just looking at stuff. Don't shoot the messenger. But of the Pauline epistles, I think 13, I think 7 of them are considered like legit.
Yeah.
And several of them are they're called Deutero-Pauline, meaning Paul didn't write them.
Makes me.
Yeah, Deutero, like Paul didn't necessarily write it, but I'll give you an example. So,
Oh yeah, wasn't there something in like First
Timothy
Peter
is
or
late. So
Yeah.
First
Timothy,
Thessalonians,
Titus, the
Corinthians,
pastorals.
Corinthians, Romans, Galatians,
Yeah.
are all regarded as being early. Philemon also is early and a genuine. And the later stuff, people say it doesn't sound like Paul. It's not
Yes.
dealing with Paul's concerns.
So like Hebrews and stuff.
Hebrews has long been thought not to be by
Yeah.
Paul. That's why it's out of order.
Now I did. Now, if it, I'm not going to lay all
Hebrews is also Jamesian.
Yes, I'm not going to lay all this out in this show, but I did an hour podcast on Ephesians. And what I did was I found a middle of the road argument. And if you want more of the arguments, just go to Talking Scripture, listen to the episode on Ephesians. That's my shameless plug for it.
Yeah,
But
check it out.
basically what we have in Ephesians is, in my opinion, a lot of Pauline bits and discourses that were later put together after Paul's long gone and put out to the Ephesians as a general letter. One of the reasons why we know this is because some of the manuscripts don't say I'm writing to the Ephesians. It's kind of like a general circulatory letter. It's also very temple-esque. So my take on Ephesians is whether or not Paul wrote it, it probably came later, but it has Paul in it. And a really good comparison to this would be Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith. If you read Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith, you know that blue book, it's so awesome. It has Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith in it.
But
he
didn't write it. Yeah.
He didn't write that. This is put in later, and I kind of liken Ephesians to that.
And a lot of it was like written down by his secretaries, and some of it may not have reflected his thinking.
His actual thinking. There's a lot of ellipses in it as well. You know, connecting larger or making things.
Yep.
Not out of bad, like it's not necessarily trying to be like, we're not trash on saying like the church is trying to manipulate us. It's just that there are second, third hand accounts sometimes, and
Yeah, a wise man once said, speaking to a young man, he said, many of the truths that we hold dear depend upon our point of view. And the young man said, your point of view? And he said, yeah, you know, the older you get, the more you realize your point of view will help shape how you teach the truth. So we're circling back to your original question. So Christianity came from this guy who was against them, but then he was for them. And I pushed back and said, well, of those 13, 14 letters, half of them probably aren't. So that's another layer of complexity. Now, I'm not going to open that Pandora's box teaching gospel doctrine in my ward, but I'll have that conversation outside of church. I'll have it on a podcast, because I don't think we can live in this world with smartphones and not, as Latter-day Saints, we better know those arguments, because
people are going to have questions.
You're going to have questions, and there's evidence for this. We're not just speaking out of our hat. Now, the evidence is more than for maybe this show, but just know that these texts are pushing against these other Christianities. It's almost like whack-a-mole. We're trying, we got to get rid of, I call him Cerinthius, but I think his name's Corinthius. We got to get rid of the view that Jesus only seemed to exist. We got to get rid of the view that Jesus was just immortal. We've got to get rid of the view that you have to live the law of Moses. Oh, you foolish Galatians. And we're playing whack-a-mole. And while we're doing this, after the apostles die and after the apostolic fathers die, then we come against a big mole, and that mole is Greek thought. And the Greeks thought that the Christians were absolutely bonkers, because you believed, it's almost like, can you imagine if I went to you and said, hey, you know David Koresh, the guy that the government killed down in Waco, Texas? Yeah, he's the Messiah. Like, if you said that to anybody in America in our time, what would they say to you?
Yeah, they'd be like, that's wild.
You're crazy.
Yeah, you're crazy.
That's how it sounded. If I walk up to you as a Greek and I'm like, well, there's this guy, the Romans crucified him and he rose again, and he's the Messiah. And then you would say, well, where is he if he rose again? Well, he ascended into heaven. And so the next group of individuals after the Apostolic Fathers are what are called the apologists. And it doesn't mean they're apologizing for Christianity. What they're doing is defending
trying
it.
to make arguments, but in making arguments, they kind of change the story a little.
Yeah, so one of the big arguments that one of these guys came up with, and there were a bunch of them, and I've got a list here.
Because what did the Greeks think was so crazy? Because they had corporeal gods, right, that they worshipped, but was it more like they didn't actually believe they were real? And the fact that they were saying that God actually took on a corporeal body and that they met him, and it was like within the last 150, 200 years, was that what was crazy to him?
Okay. So 350-ish BC, I don't know, pull it up on the internet. A dude by the name of Aristotle.
Yeah.
Coined the term the unmoving mover. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind the unmoving mover, and this is we're back to Socrates and Plato, what is the good, what is the true? Aristotle and other Greek thinkers believed that there was an absolute truth, and there was a mover that moved things, but that it didn't move. Mm-hmm. And it was like pure nous, pure mind, pure essence.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to answer whether or not the Greeks believed in the corporeal gods. These are questions I would ask my classics professors all the time. Do they really believe in Zeus? Do they really think, that so-and-so sprouted out of so-and-so's head?
Yeah.
And my Greek teachers would always say, Mike, why are you asking this? Like, we don't know. These were myths that were told, and these were plays that they saw enacted. But whether or not your average Greek believed, I guess you'd have to talk to the Greek.
Or it was more like a Marvel. It was like their Marvel Avengers.
Right, yeah.
Don't you think it rather depends on what Greek you're talking to, though? I mean, there's a big difference between an urban elite, like a Socrates or something, and like a farmer out in the Peloponnesus.
Yeah,
true.
Yeah. But one of the things that the thinkers, that the apologists are engaging with, the Greek thinkers, the ones that are writing, they're saying Christianity is foolish. And so the apologists, to basically pull their trap card or their draw four Uno card or whatever game you're playing, is they would say, well, do you know Aristotle in the unmoving mover? Mm-hmm. That's Jesus. He is the Logos. And arche ein hologos. In the beginning, in the first, was the Logos, and the Logos was God, prostontheon, and the Logos was God. And the Logos, or the Logos, I call it Logos, is Jesus. And they would say the ultimate philosophy, what the philosophers were trying to get to, Aristotle, Socrates, what's the other guy that Wazzini says? Do you know those guys, Aristotle, Socrates? Plato? Morons. I love Wazzini. Yeah. Right.
Yes.
Morons.
Or what does he say again? Is it inconceivable?
Inconceivable. Yeah. Never get involved in a land war in Asia.
Yeah.
Sorry, random. Anyways.
Princess Bride, for those who don't know.
Anyways, the apologist concept was, and they really did write this, is they said the unmoving mover is Jesus. Now, you might be able to start seeing where this can be a problem. One of the things the unmoving mover was he wasn't embodied. And so there was a big question in like the 200s, 150 AD to 250, one of the questions was, what do we do with the Logos doctrine and an embodied God? And then it bred all kinds of other questions.
The Trinity, that's where they have to figure out how can he be the unmoving mover that is disembodied while also being an embodied God.
Super challenging.
So that's kind of where these ideas and these creeds, why they have these councils.
You can chart them, like I said in my class, because what I did was I literally take a piece of yarn and I take it all the way across the wall, and I take days and we go through, and it takes me a couple hours to just get to 250 to 300 AD. And if you remember in John's class, we never even got to 300 AD.
No,
in the entire semester.
Like so early.
Yeah. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but I'm giving big picture for the sake of this video. But like I said, we could write a book. In fact, I'd love to write a book on just the events, and every chapter is a new bit for Latter-day Saints, so we kind of wrap our brains around it. But one of the ideas was, okay, he's the Logos, he's the unmoving mover, he's everywhere, but he's nowhere. And then other Christians started to push back and say, okay, but what essence is he made out of? Is he homoousios, which is like the same substance? Is he homoousios with the little iota in there, meaning the Father and the Son are like substance, but they're not necessarily same? What do we do with them as persons? these conversations are happening right around 290 to 320, and they're coming out of conversations that previous Christians had, and these Christians are known as the apologists.
The apologists.
Yeah.
So remember that the Jews already looked weird to Greek civilization.
Yeah.
Right? Greek civilization in which you idealize the human body and you would go compete naked in athletic contests, right? Mm-hmm. And when the Jewish upper classes under the Seleucids tried to Hellenize and engage in that kind of behavior, they so enraged the fundamentalist population of their country, mm-hmm. right? That they drove the Seleucids right out. They ran around. The rise of the Hasmoneans is not, in the first instance, pushing back against the foreigners. It's killing all of the Jews who went around and refused to get circumcised so they could compete naked in the athletic Greek games, right? So the Jews were already like, there's something wrong with you people, right?
Yeah.
You're little weird desert people. You're backward. You're not part of the great cosmopolitan civilization. Now, out of that comes a spin-off where here's this group. What do they idealize? A criminal, who dies broken on the cross.
That's how we look to them.
And what are the great virtues he's teaching his followers to perform? Are they being taught to be bold or noble or generous? No, humble.
Pray for your enemies.
To not resist. What kind of idiotic religion is this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
In fact, some of the was it Celsus? Who wrote against Celsus? I'm trying to remember. Is it Origen? Is Origen? Yeah, Origen in 185. He lived from 185 to 251.
Yeah.
Origen writes against Celsus, and I think one of Celsus's, if I remember right, one of his accusations against the Christians was, this is a religion for weak people, women, and children.
Yeah.
And there was some truth to that.
Kind of Nietzsche's point, too.
Yeah.
And it's on. Yeah.
Now, and I can't remember necessarily if it was Celsus, but the point was,
it seems like
Origen wrote against Celsus. He also wrote on first principles, and your audience can read these on the internet for free, translated in English, and you can read his arguments. Now, some of these early apologists had a lot of things right. Mm-hmm. Some of them, for example, believed in a pre-existence. Some of them believed in the idea of, well, some of them have temple theology in their stuff, actually, some of the early Christians. And many of them believed in a God that was embodied and that there was a father and a son, many of them. But then as we start to embrace Greek philosophy and this idea of this, what's called the Logos doctrine or the unmoving mover, by embracing those ideas and whacking that mole with that hammer, we're picking up the wrong hammer, because now we've lost the unembodied God. Our inheritance as divine sons and daughters of God, and we've embraced the very thing that's going to be their undoing. Because once we take the Logos doctrine all the way, or the unmoving mover concept all the way, we get into some of these Trinitarian concepts, maybe not necessarily at Nicaea, where they say homoousios, same substance. I think the seeds are there, but later
Athanasia.
councils where it becomes stated that he's unknowable, without body parts or passions. When we're in that realm, I think that we're way off course.
We're way off course.
McConkie, not Joseph Fielding, but Bruce and McConkie, and I can't remember, maybe it was Joseph, I can't remember, said in his mind, by the time we're at Nicaea, the apostasy is fully there. And in his view, I think it was Joseph Fielding that wrote this, the reason why it's fully there isn't necessarily on the doctrine on Nicaea religiously, but that we've married imperial power with religion. Once you've married imperial power to religion, now all manner of corruption can take place. And in this book I'm reading called
Babylon, that's the great whore.
Yeah.
Is government. We talked a lot about that earlier today.
I'm trying to remember the name of this guy, but I'm doing this book right now called The Jesus Wars, and I can't read that. What's his name? Jenkins?
So old.
I know I'm old. Philip Jenkins is writing this book called The Jesus Wars, and he literally says in his book, he says, once we marry imperial power to Christianity, the leaders of Christianity make the Sopranos look weak. The Sopranos in the show, which is R-rated, about mobsters. In other words, they become
Thank you. I wouldn't have known the other one.
Hitmen, yeah. I'm not saying to go watch R-rated shows.
Never heard of it.
I'm just quoting this guy. I haven't watched it, but the idea is that they're killing people because you believe the wrong thing. And so when somebody on the internet says you're not Christian, you're worshiping a different Jesus, that is light stuff compared to what these guys did.
So from my point of view, I want to highlight 2 points you've made, okay? Because I think it kind of tells the whole story. One, Why is the New Testament written anyway? Because from the beginning, there is massive disagreement.
Bingo.
From the beginning. That's why the books are written, right? So from the first years, we have differing ideas about Jesus. Well, they can't all be right, right? By the way, why do we have later an appearance of unity? Because we get political power allied to the church, and it goes around killing people who disagree.
They literally say that.
And then they also disregard who knows how many books and create their own canon based on what rubric.
Sure, and
I can give it to you if you want to hear it.
And so
Not right now,
And by the way, they keep over the centuries. You keep getting Christian groups, right? Whether it's the Gnostics or it's the Bogomils or it's the Cathars. What you disagree, we're going to kill you.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the truth is there was never. Right?
A unified.
Maybe from Jesus' lifetime.
Yeah.
Maybe what we should imagine
When it was
is
just the 12.
people go through like the feeding of the 5,000, and then they're out there having schismatic conversations, and they're all interpreting it differently.
Yeah.
I don't know that there. I don't believe there was any sustained period at all, and I don't know that there was any period.
And maybe this is why Jesus emphatically in his intercessory prayer is praying, asking God to help them to be one as he is one with the Father.
Because it's what is not going to happen.
Because they're not one, right? Yeah. Even then they weren't one, maybe, is why he's asking that.
Yeah, even if you just go through the epistles of Paul and read the chapter headings, like in 1 Corinthians, it says, true saints are perfectly united in the same mind and in the same judgment.
Right.
Why would he need to say that if there was
There were real-time disagreements all throughout, and he's playing whack-a-mole.
Yeah. Galatians, preachers of false gospels are accursed.
By the way, he's ripping on the Jamesians right there.
That's exactly right. Who he's talking about is the brother of Jesus. That's who he's talking about.
Exactly.
Epic.
So from this question that I posed in the beginning, sounds like we need to do a whole 10-hour breakdown.
We could do a book on this.
Okay, so this is your homework while we're gone for the next year on deployment.
Write the book.
You guys need to put together an apostasy slide deck as long as it needs to be. And I'm not joking. I will release a 15-hour Stick of Joseph video
in parts.
So just so you know, I have a 5-hour slide deck right now.
Yeah.
And that's just and every time I look at it, I'm like, it sucks. It's just so not enough.
We need one that's airtight, holds all manner of water.
And so real quick though, I just we can probably end on this. The beauty of the restoration, and it's something that we have spent hours and hours talking about as friends offline as well as on the Stick of Joseph. The beauty of the restoration and kind of our view of Christianity is that Christianity, it's a bad word to use for what it is. There was a truth that was revealed to mankind from the beginning, an ancient tradition.
Yes.
And since the beginning, there have been falling aways. It has been corrupted. And Christ comes to remind everybody of that ancient tradition and also fulfill like the central focus of that ancient tradition, a final and last sacrifice. And that it didn't destroy whatever Judaism was. It was only the natural progression of this ancient tradition. And that Joseph Smith, when he comes and he restores the temple, when he gives us the Book of Mormon, that might be the most complete, amazing text that shows what that ancient tradition is.
Except for Martin Harris, thanks.
Yeah,
Go on.
Thanks a lot, Martin Harris. He does that. It's just a reminder that God's plan has been the same from the beginning. The fact that we call Christianity and Judaism separate religions is in itself an evidence of the apostasy, because it was always supposed to be one unified religion from the beginning to the end.
A lot of Jews would disagree with that, but
I know they would.
I know what you're saying,
but even then, you could say that is a form of an apostasy. The guy you've been looking for since the beginning shows up, you reject him and kill him. That is a form of apostasy. And then later on,
not supposed to kill
those
him.
Who call Christians themselves Christians, eventually apostasy. So overall, I'm so grateful for Joseph Smith. I'm so grateful for the Book of Mormon. I'm so grateful for the temple. I'm grateful for Latter-day Prophets. And
we like James and Paul. We like them both.
Especially James, if any of you lack. All I'm saying is, if any of you lack wisdom, that's James.
Let him ask of God. Yeah. Until next time, stay curious and hungry.
That was funny.